Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast. Learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 123, and I'll be talking to Bob Flynn, who has collaborated with Alan Mulally, pitched Steve Jobs, accomplished much, failed often, learned as many lessons from 30 years of studying the science of success. He has described himself as a pragmatic Simon Sinek, an optimist, and an operator. Bill embodies his core purpose, simplifying servanthood, by spending each working moment to help people create compassionate, productive society by enabling enlightened leaders to focus on few things that truly matter to their team and stakeholders. For having great business is one way of making a better world. He has worked for and advised thousands of companies, including startups, where he has long track success of successful spanning multiple industries. Bill has been a VP of sales 8 times, twice a CMO, and once a GM for a division of a $100 multi-million IT industry company before he pivoted into the business growth coach in 2015. Prior to his 5 successful outcomes, 2 IPOs, and 7 acquisitions, including a turnaround during the 2008 financial crisis. As a coach, in addition to being connected to MG100 Women's Business Collaborative, Mass MEP, Small Giants, and the E for All, Bill has earned certifications from ScalingUp, Gravitas Impact, and many more to support him and others on their role of success. Bill's best-selling Future Further Fast, the vital few steps to take the guesswork out of growth, continues to garner a nearly 5-star rating, generating demand for virtual and in-person national and international speaking opportunities. I trust that you'll enjoy this conversation because I did, and thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Bill. How are you doing, Bill?
I'm doing great.
Good. I'm excited to have you on the show and have a delightful conversation about a lot of what you've done and the individuals you've supported in your space of, I'm going to call it innovation.
Okay.
From the standpoint of the critical thinking that you bring to the table, not only that you did from a corporate perspective, but what you do, I'm roughly going to say, with your clients one-on-one or in a group setting.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So I'm curious to unravel that and perhaps also hone into your area of specialties, because even briefly in our conversation and having read a little bit over your bio and all the accomplishments that you have gained over the years, there's lots there in the skills that you've mastered for yourself that you then go on to share with others.
Yes. Cool. Well, I will try to be delightful and we'll see how that goes.
I'm sure you will be. I'm sure it'll be great. I'm sure it'll be great. What do you believe about yourself? And do you feel it's defined who you are and where you've got to at this moment of time?
Well, that's a couple of different things. So what do I believe? What do I believe in myself?
Mm.
So so I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek. So I'm going to talk a little sort of in those terms. I've kind of believed that I skew towards a positive demeanor. Some folks are, sort of optimistic in just nature, in their nature. Others are pessimistic in their nature. I skew optimistic, which I think has um, led me to do a lot of the things that I've done. When I tell people I've done 10 startups, they think I'm crazy, I guess I always think it'll work out. It doesn't always, but and I certainly move in that direction and assume that until such time that it looks like it's not going to. And I was pretty lucky in my first five or six. They worked out. So that was pretty good. So that's sort of what I believe in myself. And then the other part of the question was sort of, and how has that got me here?
Does it define who you are?
I hope so. Yeah, I like to think that I'm a positive person. And I look for I've and back to the sort of the neuroscience. I wasn't always this way, but when I learned a lot more about how our brains work, I became even more compassionate than I was before. Because I learned that our brains are working against us
Yeah,
all the time.
yeah,
And so I'm more forgiving of myself, more forgiving of others, and also help people to try to look at things differently, right? It's sort of how you frame things that can make a difference in using this 3 pounds of gray and white matter that's keeping care of the scaffolding and plumbing underneath.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. What was that tipping point for you?
Say that again.
What was the tipping point for you in feeling and recognizing your optimism and your positive traits in how to
Yeah, I
move
don't
through
know that there was
life?
a tipping point. I I've just sort of always been this way. Luckily, this is sort of how I was born. Um, and yeah, I can even remember being, in school and whatever, just always assuming things would go well.
Okay.
I
All
wasn't
right.
always right.
Yeah.
Um, so I've never been sort of a big worrier of things, and in the last probably 15 years, I came across stoicism, and have been that sort of
Right.
resonates with me, and I read a lot about that and
Right.
follow Ryan Holiday and his stuff,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
the workings of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and all those guys. So that has sort of made a lot of sense to me um, for a long time. So
Yeah.
I don't know that I had a tipping point.
Okay. Beautiful. Because I find sometimes people do, especially when we get into the space of doing things unconsciously. So, be it the early stages of a career, early parts of life, we do things we feel is very conscious, but there's some other unconscious driving force that's directing us through life that way.
True. And I understand there's a lot of unconscious bias and other things going on. So, how much of this is me being deliberate and how much of this is just something I adopted?
Right.
I don't really know.
Right.
But I've studied beliefs and belief systems since I was in my late 20s. And understand that, basically this is all made up, and most of what we believe strongly is something we just adopted from someone else, and it
Yeah.
wasn't something that we consciously came to. So I've, over the last 30 years or so, have really, I look at, do I believe that? Why do I believe that? How did I come to that? And so I think that most of my beliefs are mine,
Yeah.
at least the ones that sort of guide me. So um, I would say that's sort of the approach I've taken as
Nice.
well.
Nice. So with all that you've done, because you've done a lot, you've been the VP of over 8 times, I think, was it in your bio?
Yeah, in sales, yeah.
So you've done a lot in terms of supporting businesses, be it from a corporate perspective, but now doing it on an individual standpoint of uh, individual coaching or group coaching and supporting people that way. What do you feel in retrospect, perhaps, and hopefully it's still very much alive for you, is a calling that you have at this juncture of your life?
Yeah, so what I do is a calling. And I always knew intellectually what a calling was, but now I'm sort of living it. So to me, a calling is something that you would just basically do for free and you just kind of do it
Yeah.
as part of who you are. And my coaching, or whatever it is that I'm doing with my clients, is something I just, time flies when I'm doing it. I have a great time. I enjoy the process. I do it a lot for free, as well. I give away my time in volunteer things and just, it's funny. I get people who connect with me on LinkedIn or somewhere, and especially these days, LinkedIn has become a little bit of a sales platform, and everyone's a little wary when someone
That's
reaches out
right.
to them or whatever.
That's
And
right.
I've had people say, so why are you telling me this? Why are you asking me these questions? And like, I don't know, it's why not? It's sort of if I can help you in some way, great. If you turn me if I turn you into a client, terrific. But if I don't, that's okay.
Yeah.
And so I've established some relationships that way, as well. So yeah, this definitely I found out in the last 6 or 7 years is the thing that I really enjoy doing. I wish I could do more of it, right?
Mm.
And I try to when I can.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find it's more fulfilling in certain areas or certain sectors, category, business models, or individuals? Do you see a shift in that?
Yeah, so the type of person that I can most be helpful to is a leader, typically leader of a company or leader of teams that is humble, hungry, and is comfortable challenging the status quo. If they are not those things, I can't help them actually, because they won't do the things. I jokingly say I don't actually do anything. I'm not, I don't deliver anything.
Yeah.
I jokingly say that I'm Socrates with a tool bag. I just ask a lot of questions of people, and really
Yeah.
basic questions that, people who run businesses are really busy and they
Yeah.
don't stop and reflect and think of, are we doing this the best possible way we can? Are
Right.
we serving our customers and our team members as well as we possibly can as a team leader? And so that is something that I uh, really enjoy doing, and find that when I'm sort of in that space with someone, really paying attention to them, my job is less so to even hear what they say, is to really hear how they're saying it, what their body is doing, what their face is doing. Or when I'm with a client, and they're um someone is talking, I'm looking around the room and seeing how other people are reacting, because my job is to make sure everybody's engaged
Right.
process. So um, you know, that type of person is who I can help the most. Now, when I leave the engagement, meaning I typically am there for a day or a couple of days with the whole team, whether they do anything after I leave or not is the other thing. So those people that sort of are the most fulfilling are the ones that do the work, right? They take the things that they learned from me, and they apply it to themselves and or their team. And it's
Mhm.
funny because I sat down with an old client. I haven't worked with him in a while, but he has a bunch of businesses that he owns, and I've worked with one or two of the businesses. And unfortunately, they were devastated by COVID. They were a study abroad company, and they had to basically just fire everybody
Yeah. Yeah.
because no one was studying abroad for years.
Yeah.
And there were like 8 or 10 of them left, and they were sort of keeping the business going in a remote way and doing some other things to just kind of do that. And I sat down with him the other day for lunch. This was he was one of my first clients, probably 7 years ago. Is when I first started working with them. And I asked him, so how are things going? And he says, this stuff that you taught us, it's, we're really doing it. And I said, well, okay, good, but why? He said, well, because we had to, or, we couldn't do everything we were doing. We had to focus and be simple and really understand what our customers cared about, what we were great at, what was profitable for us, et cetera. And he said, one of the things he said to me was really interesting because I'm a big fan of bringing the right team members on who believe what you believe, but also, obviously have the skills and knowledge to bring you forward. And I said, sometimes those people are expensive, but typically, if you get the right person, you're getting a lot more with
Right.
them. And he said, so we've been doing that. And he said, we used to hire two people for like 40,000 bucks a piece, and he says, now we hire one person for 75, so it's cheaper, and they do more than the two people did. And I said, yeah, I said, that's not me. That's like Shine or Amy Edmondson or whatever. It's, that none of
Right.
the things that I teach them are mine. I'm just taking management science that I've studied for years and translating it into things that hopefully they can use.
Right.
So that's when I'm most fulfilled. When I hear stuff like that, I was a little disappointed. So why didn't you do it when I was working with you? We needed that thing to happen for us to really sit
Right.
down and think and have the space to do it. And I said, yeah, I guess that whatever way it works.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it interesting how it unravels that way, be it for you as a spectator or a sideline participant in nudging them and guiding them through that process to their actual process of this is we can tell that that's the right formula and that's the right model, but we have to go through that process.
Yeah. Well, and some things, is sometimes you need something to move you to that, right? And theirs was a specific event that was catastrophic and
Mm.
allowed them the ability to do what they did. Some of my clients, to be honest with you, never get there.
Mm.
They enjoy the 1 or 2 days with me, and there's lots of great stuff that we create and they think about, but then I check in with them and nothing has really changed, right? Or
Mm.
very little has changed. Because again, back to the brain, our brain doesn't like change. It likes status quo. And,
Right.
so the longer we stick with something, the more likely we are to talk ourselves out of it.
Right.
So, I'm not there, prompting them on a daily or weekly basis. I see my clients sometimes once a quarter, sometimes,
Oh, wow.
once a month or once a quarter, or just maybe once or twice a quarter. And it's only for like 8 hours.
Right.
So they really have to buy into the thing, and then they go back to their offices and the regular stuff starts again.
That's
And
right.
that thing gets pushed aside, even though they said it was important and a priority.
Yeah. So, in order for change to really happen in the lives of the businesses, because I believe that you work on models for corporations and businesses, their initial buy-in needs to happen too for them as an individual, not
Yes.
only wearing that leadership hat, but as I'm an executive and my name is Jack Frost or whomever it is, they have to embody that too, right?
Yeah, they have to see themselves differently than they are. um, which is tough because we're the hero of our own stories. And if you start to look at yourself differently, it's like, okay, wait a minute, maybe I'm not the hero that I thought I was.
Mm.
And instead of seeing ourselves as a work in progress and we're just constantly improving, and when you look back, your future self looks back at your previous self, you're a different person.
Yeah,
And both of them were doing their best with what they had at the time and what they knew and what they thought through. Um, but but our brain doesn't really like that, right? It's like, don't do this thing differently because one will feel uncomfortable, or I won't be very good at it, or one of the things that I teach my clients is, and I think was something that you enjoy doing with folks, is I teach them they need to be vulnerable. I said, you need to get really comfortable with, I don't know, I'm sorry, and I need help. Because when you start to embody that, then you give the example of, I'm a human being, you're a human being, we're flawed because of that, and it's okay for us to be human beings.
yeah,
And then they'll start to be more relaxed and more comfortable. And there's this guy Simon Sinek that I like, and there's one
that's right.
saying that he says, which is, our second job at work is lying, hiding, and faking. So we don't look like we don't know what we're doing, or that we're challenging, or we're not a team player or whatever. And I say, disagreement is good. You want disagreement.
That's
You
right.
want it to be healthy, and you want different cognitive diversity in your group, so you can come up with the best possible version of something.
Yeah.
Well, we don't typically do that, right? We hire people who are like ourselves. We like people who think the way we do. It's more difficult. So I think, the things that I do, I know are difficult. And often what I do when I go back the next time is we review a lot of stuff we already did, just to sort of remind them. And I don't, as I said before, is I don't really give answers. I don't tell them what to do. I'm not a consultant.
Mhm.
So it's their thinking. I may throw in an idea every now and again, or hey, have you thought of
Right.
this? This didn't come up, but when we review what they did, it's their work, it's not mine. I'm just sort of giving them framework and walking them through it, um, to remind them of all this great thinking, and then challenging. Is it still the thinking that you have? And hopefully that gets them into this sort of habit and comfort level of being able to embrace that change. But knowing that some of my clients just take a long time. Some of my clients work with me for years, and some of them are not much different in some
Mm.
aspects than they were when I first started working with them. Which,
Why do you feel that is? Is it other than the practical piece of the repetition, the consistency, the buy-in, and all of those pieces? Why else do you feel that they are in that place of my vantage point would be resisting the change or being challenged by change?
yeah. So there's this story that I heard was, imagine there's a beam across two really tall buildings. It used to be the World Trade Center, but we don't use that anymore. But imagine a very, very tall building and two of them, and there's a beam across. And would you walk across that beam? And people say, no, I'm not. That's crazy. I would never do that. And I said, well, what if there was $1 million on the other side? I wouldn't risk my life even for $1 million. They said, what if there was $1 billion? And it's like, I don't know. I was thinking whatever, and say, well, what if your child was on the edge of the side of the other building? Would you go across then? Yes.
Oh,
Or if someone was holding a knife to the throat of your loved one, would you cross then? It's like, so there is something has to be enough to outweigh what you would normally do, right?
yeah.
And they have to come to that. I have a leader he's a wonderful human being, and he's super charismatic. He's kind of embodies what we would prototypically say a good leader is. But he is very uncomfortable with giving the company to the other people in the company. So
Right.
when things start to go bad, he, he wants to, teach them to be better and work with them and et cetera, but he can't help himself, right? There's a tool that they use, to check the tasks and things that they're supposed to be doing as individuals, and everyone has access to it, and he has access to the whole thing. And my understanding is he goes in every day and just sends a note to people like, how are you doing on this thing? How are you doing that thing? And they're like 2, 3 levels down from him.
Oh,
Um, and he just like, he can't stop.
wow.
It's just amazing, right? It's just, there's that, I'm going to assume it's some sort of fear or anxiety that is driving him. Like, if I don't stay on top of this, then my business is going to fall apart.
Right.
And, you know, tragically, it's the opposite. His business will fall apart because as he gets bigger, that doesn't scale,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's gonna take away his personal life, and it's gonna make him more anxious. He's got to learn to just let people trust people, let them make mistakes, and then correct them, and
Right.
and help them to grow, so you don't have to do everything all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things I teach my clients is just fire yourself from the day to day.
That's right. That's right. What do you believe are some of the attributes connected to that for your purpose?
Um, so so what I do with my clients is it's about progress, and progress is, I keep telling them, we're here to progress forward. We're not here to achieve anything. We will certainly set goals and things, but whether we reach them or not is not as important is are we progressing? Are we getting better? Are we doing things differently, moving towards that? We may not reach it because, I keep saying, I said they're on stickies for a reason.
Yeah,
Because you can just rip them off and write a new sticky, right? I mean, we don't
that's
we
right.
don't etch it into concrete here, right? So,
That's right.
so everything you're doing, you're making up anyway.
Yeah.
So, but you want to make sure that you're progressing, that you're doing those things that move you forward. And there are things that move us forward, and there are things that stop us from moving forward. And I've already sort of mentioned one of them. And so there's a push and a pull moving us forward, right? There's something pulling us or pushing us, whether it's something we long for or something that we are dissatisfied with, and that generally moves us towards progress. But then there are two things that are always working against us, not always at the same time, which is habit and anxiety.
Mm.
So those are typically the things that stop folks in general, but with my clients as well, is that you just get into habits. And I'll walk them through a meeting. Like, how do you run a meeting? And they'll walk me through sort of the meeting process. And I said, well, why do you do it that way? And usually, as you sort of said at the beginning, it's unconscious or whatever. It was just, well, this is the way we do it. And I said, well, is that the best way to do a meeting? Have you ever had all the participants in the meeting score the meeting from 1 to 5? 5 was a great meeting. We are so good at this. We should be teaching other people. Or 1, we're not doing this at all, or we're not doing it very well at all.
Right.
And then talk about how to make it better, and don't do that either. It says, well, how do you know this is the best version of that meeting?
Yes.
And then this is where I give them I said, I don't really know that there's a perfect way to do a meeting. I said, but there are some things that help with a meeting, and I'll give them sort of a framework and say, here's what I've come to believe it's a decent way to run a meeting.
Right.
And by the way, the agenda is the third thing on the list.
Mm.
And usually the agenda is the first thing for most people, right? I said, the first thing you want to do is, what is the ideal outcome of this meeting? Like, if this
Right.
meeting went swimmingly well, how would we know? Like, how would we say
Yes.
that that is? And, okay, great. Now that you know what that is, who should be in the meeting to give you the best chance to reach that outcome? Now that
Yes.
you know what it is. Okay,
Yes.
great. Now write the agenda,
Right.
right? And then there's a couple other steps for that. And then, so I teach them how to do that. And then I sit in on their meetings, and guess what happens? They run it the whole
Doesn't.
way, right?
Yes.
They haven't written an outcome. They don't start with good news or things to get people engaged and involved at the beginning. Someone does a lot of the talking. They don't prioritize the things they're going to discuss. Whoever talks first, that's where we go. And I would stop them and say, well, okay, of all the things you could discuss in this meeting to get you to that outcome, is this the thing that is the most important and
Right.
significant thing to talk about? And they'll be like, oh, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, really thought about that. Well, yeah, well, that's your job, right? Is to reach the outcome of the meeting.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So those are some of the things that I think get in the way of people, the habit and anxiety of things. As I mentioned, the leader before, I think it's really around anxiety or fear. That's what stops us most of the time. And that's our brain working against us, right? I like to say, folks, our brain hasn't had a major upgrade in 10,000 years at least. It is not designed to do what we're asking to do. It's designed to keep about 150 or so people alive on the savannah in a very dangerous place. We're not there anymore, but our brain doesn't know that. It's in a dungeon. It's in a dark and dingy dungeon, and it's relying on other information to help make decisions.
Right.
But it's still working with that premise. That's why, we get scared, when something socially threatens us.
Yeah.
We get scared as if it's going to kill us because our brain is like, oh, that's
Designed that way.
that's going to kill us, right?
Yeah.
Being made fun of or not knowing how to do something or whatever. That's why we start sweating and our heart starts pumping. It's like,
That's
run.
right.
The heart's saying run.
Yeah.
The brain is saying run. So anyway, so yeah, so that's that's what I've come to believe.
How does that apply to how you operate as Bill? And be it through your own life or your professional life, what are the attributes that you have that keep you on purpose?
So I have everything that I teach my clients, I do. So I have core values that I ascribe to. Um, and I've listed the key stakeholders in my life, right? And in a
Yeah.
priority order. So when I'm doing things or when something comes up, I can sort of look at it and say, what is this? Where does it fit? Should I be doing it now? Because if something comes up and it's horrible, your brain's like, do it now. And you have to slow it down and say, well, is that really the right thing to do? Um, so, those attributes of sort of understanding what's most important, you know, and I did this. I have a daughter. She's now in her mid 20s. And before she was born, I sort of sat myself down, if you will, and I said, what kind of father do I want to be? Uh, and I sort of thought about it and boiled it down to again, that what is that outcome? And the outcome that I wanted to ascribe to was I want my daughter to want to be with me, but not need me.
Right.
So everything I did, or I tried, I'm sure I failed in some spots, was to build towards that, right? Is um, that obviously at a certain age they need you, right? You have to,
That's
they can't
right.
walk or feed themselves or whatever,
That's
right? So
right.
there's
Yeah.
certain things
Yeah.
you got to
Yeah.
do. But as she got to be,
Yeah.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and onward, I slowly progressed and I wanted her to be more and more thoughtful and independent and sort of self-reliant. So actually, one of the things that her mother and I would say to her, I think we probably started doing this when she was 11 or 12, was she would ask us, can I go do something? And we would say, make your case, right? And so we trained her from there until, through college. If you
Nice.
want to do something, you need to think it through. And we rarely said no to our child, unless it was unsafe or something. We would say yes, but not right now. And, because most of the stuff she asked for was pretty reasonable. Um, so, those were the things that I think helped me, as an example, sort of being I think a decent parent. And I think we're there. She's, she lives on her own and she's had some trouble in the last few months. And, she called me and told me about it.
Mm.
And I purposely didn't, offer I wasn't helpful. I wasn't trying to be
Yes.
super helpful
Yeah.
as what parents do, I asked how she was doing. I asked what I could do does she need anything from me and whatever. And she said, no, it's, whatever. And I said, um, I did offer some coaching, like, because she had to make some pretty, life, adult decisions. And I said, make sure that you're deciding and you're not choosing. And then we
Right.
talked about the difference between deciding and choosing. And so she went through that and then talked to her a couple weeks later. And she said, okay, we've decided what to do. Here's what we're going to do. And it was great. I mean, it was just wonderful. I don't know if it's going to work out. She still hasn't executed on it yet, but it was nice to see that all that sort of work, if you will, you put in early on,
Yeah.
seems to be showing itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Very rewarding. Very rewarding, no
Exactly.
doubt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially because there is that emotional connection, obviously, that you have because it's your daughter rather than a client, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely more there. And, and it's harder because, there is that you don't want your child to struggle or to go through anything, which to be honest with you, they
Exactly.
have to struggle and they have to go through stuff.
That's
How are they
right.
going to learn, and at some point I'm going to be dead and she's hopefully will still be alive. So she needs to be able to work without me. And
That's
it's
right.
probably good to get a head start on that. Hopefully
Yes.
it's a good head start.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure
But
it is. Yeah.
yeah.
What is your intentions with the skill sets that you've developed over the years and all the education and all the experiences that you've gained, be it working for somebody, now working for yourself and consulting and all of that? What's the intentions that you have behind the craft of coaching, for the lack of better terms?
Yeah. So one of my core values is mastery.
Okay.
Um, and so that's really what I have strived for is so when I was and when I was doing startups, I basically hired as a sales guy. I was in my early 20s, doing startups then. And I had never done sales before. I mean, I just graduated college. I had worked at, retail and that kind of stuff, but it wasn't sort of doing commercial selling. And I wasn't very good at it. It was very uncomfortable. But I did everything that you were supposed to do, right? You're supposed to be likable, and you're supposed to know how to create rapport, and you're supposed to know your products, and you're supposed to know your competition and whatever. I had all that down, and I still wasn't very good at it. And I was like, why? Why am I not good at it? Everything is where it should be. Um, and then I asked myself, what is selling? What does it mean to be a salesperson? What are you trying, again, back to that sort of outcome, right? What I boiled it down to is a good salesperson is there to help someone else make a decision.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, well, how do we make decisions? And this is how I get into neuroscience. Was I said, well, how does the brain make decisions? And I learned that the brain does not make decisions the way I thought it was. We are not rational things, right? And when with the use of fMRIs and such, when we make a decision in an fMRI, which is basically just blood flow, the limbic areas of our brain light up first. And very often before we are consciously aware that we have made a decision.
Mm-hmm.
So decisions are primarily emotional, and then we make up the reasons for them after the fact. So basically, we're lying to ourselves after we made a decision, right? And this is the way it works. So I said, okay, so I need to be able. So knowing that, I said, what areas can I improve to help me to put that into practice? So I became much more, empathetic, if you will, right? And I was much more engaged and acknowledging that I'm here to help you make a decision. And I know that you're more likely to make a decision for me if you feel, certain emotions that are positive towards me. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. And I there were lots of things that I did, but one thing that I often did and employed very tactical was at the beginning of any meeting, especially someone I had not met before, I would go around the room and say, one is I would look for what's called the bully with the juice, which I liked, which is who's the person in the room that really everyone's looking towards, usually one, maybe two people for this meeting, right? Like this is the person that we're sort of relying upon to, should we move ahead with this thing or not? So I make sure I identify that person or those people. And it isn't always the person with the biggest title.
That's
right. Sometimes it's someone else, but make sure you do that. But I would ask, let's assume that this meeting went really well and you've got everything you needed from me to help you move forward, either make a decision or move to the next steps. What would you need to have learned from me or learned for yourself to do that? And then I would have everyone say something, I would write it down, and I would make sure that I get everybody, especially the bully with the juice. And then anything I said from that time forward was primarily focused on those things that they said. Mm-hmm. And I would go through my presentation. Sometimes I would add stuff that they didn't do because I would just say, other people who are like you would think this is important. I'll bring it up, etc. And then I would go through my list at the end and say, okay, you wanted to do this, this, and this. Is there anything I missed? Is there anything that you want more information on, etc. And what I did there, obviously, not only is it a good way to do anything in that situation, but I appealed to their emotions, right? They're like, wow, this person really cares about me. They listened to me. I was acknowledged. They also repeated back what I said. So I felt, heard. And they were putting me first, as opposed to most salespeople assume that you have their money in your wallet and it's their job to take it from you. Right.
Yes.
And because that's our thing, we're like protecting and whatever, right? And so after I learned that, I became the number one or number two salesperson everywhere I went.
Oh my goodness.
Because I had this sort of superpower, right? And I would have people who I worked with that it worked out. I actually recommended they not work with us because what they wanted was not really, we weren't the best solution. And I knew of other solutions, and I would recommend, hey, you should probably talk to these people. They're probably a better, we could probably do stuff for you, but we're going to have to change what we do. We won't be happy. You're not going to get everything. So eventually you're going to be unhappy. And so let's not do that. And I've had some of those people recommend other people to me.
Mm.
They're like, Bill, he's a great, I think what you want, what he has, and he's the guy you want to talk to because, you know,
Right.
he's not your typical salesperson. Is
Yes.
what I would hear about.
Yes.
Bill, you don't sound like a salesperson. I'm like, good.
Yes.
I don't want to.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's sort of how that's helped me
Hmm.
to get to where I am and help my clients. And
Yeah. The intentions behind um, supporting others, I guess, really.
yeah, we're here to, the I wrote my purpose, my core purpose for what I do now. And it really is around the premise of I think it's a shame that really good ideas, really good businesses, and really good people or team leaders fail or struggle for completely preventable reasons.
Mm.
My job is to help you avoid that as much as
Right.
possible. It's not going to be completely avoidable, right? Because you may have picked the wrong market or whatever, and I can't do anything about that. But I can help you figure that out quickly, especially if you're a startup person or whatever.
Sure.
Or maybe someone's not in the position that they should be in.
Yeah.
I had one client. I was working with the head of implementation, and he was really struggling with his team, and they weren't really working very well. And I said, well, my understanding is around people is when you want to put people in the position to do something that they love and often are good at as often as possible. But what we try to do is we try to reshape someone to fit into what we want them to do. And I said, you have to stop doing that. And I think it was either Oprah or Maya Angelou or someone who said, when someone shows you who they truly are, believe them,
Believe that. Yeah.
right? I think it's Maya Angelou, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
And and I said, this guy is telling you who he is, and you keep trying to turn him into something else because
Right.
he was the leader of the team. And I said he doesn't like people. He doesn't like directing people. He likes to work on his own. He loves customers. He loves to solve problems. I said, so stop doing that, right? Get him to do something. Is there a position in the company that he could do that?
Right.
Um, and there was. So they moved him off and let him, there's still a client of mine. They moved him off. He is way happier. The team is much more productive.
Nice.
They're much more fulfilled because he was driving everybody crazy,
Sure. Yeah.
and now the person I was working with is like, oh, the thing's great and this team is working wonderfully, etc. And I said, yeah, because you started to think about things in a different way,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And I didn't tell him what to do. I just said, look, this is what I understand, right? This is what um, anyone who's thought understood what teams are and how to get the best out of people. And this is our Amy Edmondson and
Hmm.
General Mitchell and Edgar Schein did a lot of this in his work in the 40s and 50s. And um, is that and Marcus Buckingham is doing this now as well, is people are spiky and idiosyncratic. And your job is not to make them well-rounded people. Your job is to make a well-rounded team with spiky and idiosyncratic people. And I said,
Right.
that's the fun of it.
Yeah.
Um, because when you can, as long as the key outcome of what you're trying to accomplish gets done, it doesn't really matter how it gets done internally, right? How,
Yeah.
how the sausage is made is not important as long as it's getting done optimally as an outcome and you have fulfilled and engaged team members. But often what we do is we don't do that. We try to force fit things into have people do stuff that they don't really enjoy doing. And someone else on the team might love what they hate. And it's like, well, then great, then swap.
That's right.
Who
That's
cares,
right.
right? Made up
That's
like,
right.
well, it's not in the job description. I said, well, who wrote the job description? Again, something someone made up at some point.
Yes. Yes.
And maybe they were wrong for this particular situation.
Yeah.
So
Have you seen that shift happen over the, I guess, couple of decades that you've been in the industry from clients that you have worked or even part of the sales team of the of the C-suite versus the leaders that are coming up now? Have you seen their own mentality shift and maybe their receptivity to welcome the change and be less micromanagers, so to speak?
Um, I'd like to say that I have seen that. but I don't know because I have a skewed view, Ranjan,
Hmm.
because I pick my clients and I put them through a process before I work with them to try to see who they really are before I work with them. Again,
Yes.
because if they're not a humble, hungry learner who's comfortable challenging status quo, I can't really help you. And so,
Yeah.
but that's not on a resume. That's not on LinkedIn. That's not on
That's
anywhere.
right. That's
You have
right.
to, you have to see their behaviors. So I
Yeah.
do this process. So I'm a bit skewed. Um, so I'd like to think that that's true, but I also know that, especially in the West, um, the system that we or systems that we put them through do not advocate that, right?
Hmm.
Is and do not promote that. You are rewarded for being to having the answer or to
Hmm.
being correct, not to asking great questions, right? We don't give A's or great grades for asking great questions. We we
No.
we give for knowing stuff. Um, and we also have this sort of hero worshiping thing, and that's a good thing, right? Movies reflected other things, and I mean, and I'm sure you know, and I've learned is that that's just not how it works. And what I really liked is that when COVID was sort of in its height, and we looked at, it affected every country,
Absolutely.
some more than others. And then you looked at the different leaders of the countries, and then you looked at the outcomes in terms of
Hmm.
disease and then death. And 8 of the top 10 countries at one point were run by women,
Hmm.
and they did things differently than others, right? They
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
basically they were trying to help the populace, and I
That's right.
think the woman who was running New Zealand was sort of the poster child of this. But
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
woman running Denmark, the woman running Iceland, they all did the same sort of thing where most of the men were like, either denied it or, they were like, we're going to beat it. And they weren't necessarily protecting their constituency. They were acting like, they know stuff and they were a leader and they were,
Right.
acting a certain way like a leader is supposed to act, where these women were being vilified for being too soft and
That's
whatever.
right.
But in the end,
That's
they had better
correct.
outcomes than the other approach. And the
That's
US
right.
is horrible as well with Trump doing things. Um, so you know that um, that way of thinking and understanding, I'm hoping that we say this generation of millennials and
Yeah.
such, and my daughter are more thoughtful, less about the money. They saw their families go through 2008, and they're like,
Yes.
is this really all there is? And so let's hope that that's true. But I know that there's so much working against us, and most behavior is affected by the environment much
Hmm.
more than by the individual, right? We've
Hmm.
certainly take someone out of a certain environment and put them in a different one, they actually start to act differently.
That's right.
So it's not so much intrinsic that's driving us to behave in a certain way. So I think some of these foundational things you know that we've come up with through our lives, especially education, have to also change
Hmm.
for it to be better. But then you also see, like we talked about the conscious capitalism movement at the beginning, and other businesses that are really thriving and
Yeah.
doing well, and they're acting a different way.
Yeah.
Because if you're patient, that's a much better way to run a team and a company than the way we've been taught to do it, which is, very, command and control kind of thing,
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So I think eventually we're going to get there, but I don't know how well we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Quite honest.
Wow. That's interesting. That's interesting. And granted, you get to pick and choose your clients just as many of us entrepreneurs do. I find it equally interesting how I see such a stark contrast between the old paradigm to a new paradigm shifting. And I'm sure you have that. Maybe you've just been a bit sheepish in sharing that stark contrast. But I'm sure, and I would like to think, hopefully not too Pollyanna-ish, that there are many leaders out there who are believing in themselves from that conscious movement process.
Yeah. So I've studied leadership, and I put leadership in quotes for a reason because I've come to believe that there's really no such thing as leadership. And what I mean by that is there's no like blueprint that you can say this is leadership, and if you do these things, you're considered a great leader.
Right.
Because if you look at leaders, and what people think are great, it's a choice. We choose leaders. You can't say I'm your leader. You can say I'm your boss, or I have the authority or the power. That's different than being a leader, which
Right.
is the people voluntarily choose a leader. They say, I'm
Yes,
going to follow you. Followership is a thing.
that's right. Yeah.
You could, we don't really study followership, which is really interesting because I've for the last 5 or 6 years, I was like, who's studied followership and how do you create followers?
Mhm.
So I have my own little theory, which is that leaders really only have two things that they all have in common. And it's not charisma, integrity, whatever those things are, because they're different, right? And the example I say is Steve Jobs is considered a great leader. He had little to no integrity.
Mm,
He would buy a car every 6 months so he could park in the handicap zone.
mm,
Um, and I have people who worked with and for him in my life. Warren Buffett is not charismatic in any way, shape, or form,
mm.
right? But there are lots of people who would consider them really great leaders, right? And if you look at
Sure.
Alan Mulally and just go through the leaders that we've known over the last 10 or 15, 20 years, they're all very, very different, right? They're
Mhm.
spiky and they're idiosyncratic, but they have leaned into that, right?
Right.
And people have said, I will follow you and I will forgive you of these other things
Right.
that probably aren't great. And we certainly
Right.
have seen this here in the United States in the last 8 or so years. People have forgiven someone a lot
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Um, and so the two things I think you have to have is there has to be something compelling about whatever it is you're trying to do. So and some people call this vision, right? You have
Sure.
to have a compelling vision because people say, I want to help you do that. And
Yeah.
the only other thing that I would consider an attribute of you is courage.
Hmm.
I think they all have courage, whether we like them or not. There's something courageous about them. Why? Because they're putting themselves out there and saying things that they truly believe, and people are gonna say no. If
Yeah.
you're a good leader, you have to give away a lot of stuff, and you have to trust in a lot of other people, um, and there are lots of I've written this down somewhere, and there's like 10 things I say you have to be really courageous about. But other than that, uh, all the leaders that I've looked at, and I've looked at dozens, if not hundreds, are all very, very different kinds of people. And you could never say that they fit into a list
Mm-hmm.
of stuff. I've been to conferences and like the list of great leaders. They're humble and they're charismatic, they have integrity, and they're about service and whatever. Blah, blah, blah. Like, but then if you look at the reality, that's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's sort of what I've come to believe. And I apply that to what I do is I'm not trying to turn you into a particular leader that I think you should be, right? Because I'm not choosing you as my leader, these other people are.
That's right.
Now, I think I think if you have some of those attributes, if you're humble and charismatic and have integrity and all those kinds of things, those are certainly helpful. They don't hurt at all,
That's right.
you know? Um, but I haven't found that you have to have them in order to be considered a great leader.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. It's a nice, yeah. It's a nice to have because it softens some of those other attributes that you talked about in having the courage and not being as sheepish in other people's emotion state or ego, if you will, because you're just charging forward with your agenda, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you have to have a vision, but you also have to know that the direction and the path to that vision is not a straight line.
That's right.
It's going to be messy. It's going to be all over the place. And you have to have the courage to be able to say, okay, well, that was a setback and let's learn from that. But the
Yeah.
direction is generally still correct. You know, I think if you have those things, you can then transfer that leadership to other places. And there's one person that when someone says to me, who's the leader that you sort of
Emanate
say is
towards.
puts at the top of the list. And there's one guy, which is his name is Alan Mulally. Now,
Okay.
do you know who Alan Mulally is?
I do not.
Okay, so Alan Mulally to me is the best leader that I know of, at least in business, that we've had in 50 to 100 years. Alan Mulally ran Boeing commercial aircraft through 9/11. He
Okay.
took it over before 9/11 happened. And then they came out of 9/11 better than they went in, believe it or not.
Mm.
Then he went to Ford and in 2006 went through the 2008 crisis, and Ford came out better from the 2008 than when he went in.
Wow.
So no leader that I know of, at least in business, has ever done that twice,
Mm. Wow.
right? And he is a wonderful human being. I actually know Alan now. He's I don't call him a friend of mine, but he's someone that I know. He's in a group, a same group that I'm in for some of my coaching stuff. And the reason I know him is because Alan Mulally read something I wrote and reached out to me and said, "I want to meet you. I love what you wrote about this thing." And so Alan Mulally has been asked by three presidential organizations to be on the cabinet, and he's refused all of them.
Wow.
Um, in the middle of COVID, he was asked to help the Mayo Clinic figure out some stuff. I mean, he's a big deal.
Yes.
And he called me, and I'm
Right.
nobody, right? I mean, no
Well,
one knows who I am, right?
yeah.
Um, and we talked for 45 minutes, and he was the nicest person, and he was great. And he's now the reason I'm in this coaching group. So you can be those things. You can be, he's humble,
Right.
he's
Right.
charismatic, he has integrity, right? But I think he was able to do similar industries, but very different, right? Airplanes and cars, they
Sure.
certainly are transportation, but they're completely different things.
Yes.
Um, and he was able to do it twice, right? And I'm sad that he's not running something else, and he's in his 70s now.
Right.
Because he is to me the leader that if you were ever to aspire to be someone like that, you want to be like Alan Mulally.
Nice.
Um, but he's a unicorn.
Sure. Sure. And I'm trusting that there are others out there who are maybe diamonds in the rough, if you will, that are
Yeah.
still finding their feet
Well, we have
and
we have other wonderful leaders. Bob Chapman, who runs Barry Windmiller, is a great leader. John Mackey, who ran
Mhm.
Whole Foods, was a great leader, and
That's right.
there are lots of people like that.
Yeah.
But they are unfortunately fewer than we need. And
Right.
I said it before, and I will say, I think women are better leaders in the long term than men.
Mm.
For the most
Mm.
part. There's certainly
Mm.
people like Alan and whatever. Because I think the traits and the skills that you need to be a great leader are more inherent in women than they are in
Yes.
men.
Yeah. Especially
You
on
know?
a communal, on a larger scale
Yeah, yeah.
model. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Men are about winning and defeating others and whatever, and women generally aren't like that. Um, and in the short term, I think if you want to like just turn something around really fast and or sell it, then you probably want to put a man in there.
That's
Because
right.
he'll just bowl through and whatever, and who cares about the wake? But in 2 or 3 years, he'll turn it around and they'll sell it for
Yeah.
twice as what it was. I'm like, great. But if you want to build a long, enduring company,
Yeah.
feminine attributes and traits are much more prevalent than your typical male traits.
That's right. That's
And I've
right.
just seen that, right? Is just that's
Yeah.
just it's not reverse prejudice. It's just sort of what happens. And I think my example of COVID is is an exemplar of that, right?
And recognizing the people who were in those leadership roles, what is it, the attributes that they are carrying? Because I'm sure you've seen it, because I've definitely seen it. Just because there's a woman's name, title, she looks, breathes, and behaves like a woman. But when she hits the boardroom, it shifts. And she's no longer a softer, feminine, compassionate woman. And I get it, we need to be assertive and all that. But the personality attributes can shift like that, be it that it's the environment and the culture that's trained us to do that.
Yep.
But then it begs a bigger question is what is it in women and in men that prevents them to stay true to their own character? I don't know how much of an influence the patriarchal system has had on this, rather in the space of have they lost themselves in figuring out who they are?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. But but it does get back to what we mentioned earlier, which is unfortunately those boardrooms and other places are dominated by a particular um, attitude, which is short term in nature.
Mhm.
And as I said, you have to be patient. You when and go back to Alan, it's he was there from 2006 to 2014. It still took him 8 years, right? It took him a long time. He didn't like, and
Right.
we like that, right? We like quick fixes. We like something to
Sure.
feel good. We like, the sugar hit or whatever. Um, and we're not patient. And so those boardroom people are not patient.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of them are men. Um, and that's, I think, a problem. And I think having the courage of your convictions, and I'll use an example with Bob Chapman, who was a Barry Wehmiller. So they're a manufacturing company, and they're in the middle of the country. And in 2008, they lost 30 or 40% of their orders,
Oh,
which was billions of dollars.
yeah.
And his board was saying, well, we need to cut people. And he said, no, I'm not doing that. I said, we created this company not to make stuff, but to be a wonderful place to be and to work and to enjoy each other. He said, so we're going to find another way to do it. And luckily, he was strong enough and good enough and won his job that his board didn't fire him. And what he did was he created a furlough system and basically said, hey, everyone has to take a month off, unpaid. And then if we do that, if everyone does that, and we're gonna, we on the staff, he's like, I'm not gonna take any salary. We're gonna cut our salaries for everyone else in half, so we're all sacrificing as well. Um, and that's what they did. And what happened was after he did that, the group of people who had to do that started to trade amongst themselves. And the people who couldn't really afford to take 4 weeks off traded with people who could. So some of the people took 5 weeks off, and some people only took three. And they didn't set that up. This was sort of done outside the thing. And they got through 2008, and they were stronger than they were. They actually grew faster than they were growing after
Right.
that because
Right.
everyone stayed. It would created this camaraderie, this
That's right.
esprit de corps, etc. And the companies that didn't do that had to rehire, and he didn't have to do that. So that's something that a parent would do,
Yeah.
not something that a quote unquote leader would do, right? Your job
Right.
is to sacrifice people for the numbers. And he said,
Right.
no, I'm sacrificing the numbers for the people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he benefited from that. And the
Beautiful.
company did from that, and I think that's an example of how we have to start thinking because, we sacrifice, a lot of people say, who's the number one constituency in your company? And people say, well, the customer is always right. The customer is number one. And I said, well, if that's true, that means that all these people that work in this building or whatever with you are at least number two or worse. I said, so, and they've been with you for years and decades, and these customers come and go. So you're saying these people who are ephemeral and come and go are more important than these other people. I
Mm-hmm.
said, you're going to have trouble
Mm-hmm.
because they know that, and they're not going to be loyal to you. They're not going to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
try to help you succeed because you've just told them that they're at least number two.
Right.
And until we realize that these people are the most important people in the organization and in the whole all the stakeholders, the people in the company are the most important. And your job is to make them better and help them get better at what they do. And by the way, if you take care of them, they'll take care of your customers better than they ever did before. But
Yeah.
we've not been taught that.
Yeah. And it's the same vantage point of a community, because that's often it. You work
Yeah.
for a company, you work for a corporation, you're spending a good chunk of your life there, so it becomes an additional family. And how do we thrive in a place of in a family or a community or physical physical spaces? I was going to go to a place of traditionally positioned out to be like a church or somewhere where there is individuals that all have the same mission, if you will.
Mhm.
And corporations do exactly the same, but that conflict can sometimes obviously often get in the way where it is the bottom line
Yeah. And by the way,
that
the bottom
becomes.
line is super important.
Absolutely it
Right.
is.
I mean, because if you don't have profit in cash, then you can't take care of your people, right? So you still have to
Ultimately.
do all those things. But it's the bottom line. This is Milton Friedman's problem, right, that he created in the 70s. He said, the primary stakeholder is your job is to make the shareholders richer.
That's right. That's right.
And that's what we did. And we've been doing that for decades.
Yeah.
But we forgot that just making them richer is not really the ultimate goal over the long term.
Yeah.
By the way, they'll be richer if they are not number one on the list.
Yes.
Take care of your people, they will do a better job. I mean, Southwest has proven that for 50 years. They're the most profitable company, consistently profitable company in the world over the last 50 years. They've only not been profitable one quarter in the last 50 years. And that was in the middle of COVID. They just couldn't sustain.
Wow.
And what are they focused on? They focus on their people love working there. It is harder to get a job at Southwest than it is to get into Harvard.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Wow.
they have a 2% acceptance rate. Harvard's like 4%.
Wow.
Because people love it. They don't leave, and it's a great place to be, right?
Yeah.
And they are, by the way, they are, I think, now the third most profitable airline in the world.
Mm.
Yet they only serve
Such a small
400 million
market.
people.
Yeah.
7 billion, and they're still more profitable than these other airlines.
Interesting.
So if you think about that as a shareholder, you want a share of that.
That's right.
Not a share of American who asks for money every 10 or 15 years because they can't run a healthy business.
Yes. Yes. Interesting. It's all very fascinating how leaders work, and not only from a business standpoint, but how they actually move through the world too. And I feel like this, we could go on for way, way, way longer, and especially unraveling some of those additional leadership qualities that could potentially help and support from a conscious pace in how businesses and what is it the market's really crying for.
Yeah.
So I think that might be a part 2 possible conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I have plenty more to say on that as well. But yes, that's it is pretty fascinating. I find it very fascinating studying this for the last, because I was taught a certain thing growing up, and what I found out with that no, that's not. And I've worked for really bad leaders.
Yeah.
Right. Who and by the way, I was one of them. I say it now, I wish I knew 15, 20 years ago what I know now. I would have done things differently. And by the way, my life would have been easier had I done that as well. So I'm hoping we're moving in that direction, Ranjan.
I hope so.
Especially for my daughter's sake.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we'll see.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. It's just needs maybe a little bit more nurturing, a little bit more guidance along the way for it to fully flourish.
I'll do my little part in this big.
I'm sure it's bigger than little. I'm sure it's bigger than little. Thank you so much for sharing all that you've shared, all those stories, experiences, and especially those nuggets of wisdom that you've put across the way that others can be more conscious and more aware of, whether they're wearing the leadership hat or whether they're wearing the following hat, doesn't matter. It's to become ultimately more conscious and more aware of our own responsibilities and how we come to the table.
Yeah, I would say be more curious and compassionate.
Yes.
If we can be more of those two things, whether you do it in personal life or business or wherever, you'll be much better. Stay curious as long as you can when working with other people. Don't assume you know what they're thinking or what they're intending, right? Be curious. And then compassion is empathy with action. Right? Try to put yourself in their shoes and then take some sort of action.
Yeah.
To me, if you can do more of those things, then we're better off.
Love it. It's beautiful. Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you
for taking the time, energy, and your sharing your resources with us. I so appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.